Hey, it's Levi and welcome back. In today's video, we are re-Tolexing this Symarshall 1960 cab. In the last video, we stripped everything off the old cab and removed the Tolex, sanded off all the glue, all that stuff. I definitely recommend checking that video out first before you get into this one. So I ordered the Tolex piping and grill cloth from Next Gen Guitars in Canada. And I bought this stapler from Home Depot. This is just a JT27. I use this for doing the grill and the piping. So in this project, we're starting from a totally unfinished raw wood cabinet. And the first step we've got to take care of is filling these old rivet holes. I drilled them out and glued in short pieces of dowel that I cut by hand. Using dowels for this might be overkill. You could probably do this with wood filler and that would be fine too. All right, for step 2, I'm filling these recessed portions on top of the cab. This is where the old anti-skid plates were, and the new ones I got are flat, so that's why I had to fill these. Once I got them fitted nicely, I glued them down with some wood glue. All right, for step 3, measuring and cutting the Tolex down to size. I tried to lay it all flat out so I could get an idea of how big of a piece I actually need. I cut off the piece for the back panel and then I laid everything out to do the main piece that covers the whole cabinet. So the whole cabinet is covered in one piece of Tolex, so you just gotta have one big long piece if you wanna do it all in one shot. I ordered 5 yards of Tolex and it was definitely enough. And that leaves you with some extra material when you're done. Technically, due to the width of the material, I could probably cover another 412 cab with my leftover material. I used a piece of tape to give me a guide of how big I want my Tolex piece to be, and it also gives me a decent straight-ish edge that I can line things up against. And once we got this all cut down to size, we're ready to start gluing. So step 4, we are applying the glue to the Tolex and the cabinet. So you want to prep your workspace. It took a little bit of time just to make sure that, everything is set up nicely so it's a nice, easy to work in environment and I'm not tripping over stuff or anything like that. Now I use an old paintbrush to apply the glue and it gummed up pretty bad. It got me through this project, but after it was done, that paintbrush is not gonna be used again. I chucked it out afterwards. Once you're done applying the glue, you gotta let it set for about 20 to 30 minutes before you're ready to actually pair the two things together. All right, for step 5, we're mating the Tolex and cabinet and cutting everything down so it fits real nice. To make sure that we're getting good contact between the two things, I'm using a dry paint roller to just roll over the surface a bunch of times, making sure things are firmly in contact and that I'm not getting any air bubbles. Once we've got the Tolex covering the entire cab, we've got to cut the edge. And I messed this part up, so be careful when you're doing this cut. Despite messing up the cut, I still patched it and made it work so it's not all that noticeable. I also did the edges in a second session to allow for more direct focus on those areas. So stage 1 was all just getting those big flat surfaces glued on, and then I came back again with the front edges and the back edges, and I put some special time and care into making sure that those are fitting nicely. So cutting the corners on the cab is a make or break step of the entire project. If you mess this up, you could end up with exposed wood and stuff, and it might not look so good. There's whole videos about cutting corners of Tolex, and I think those are definitely useful. But the short of it is that you just cut one axis at a time. So I cut a 45 on the front side, and once the Tolex rounds the corner, I cut it again a little bit differently just to make sure everything is filling each corner and looking nice. So those front angles are a tricky portion of the cab. So I did a relief cut on the angled bit of the cab, and that allowed the Tolex to sit flat and it allowed kind of minimal wrinkles and folds. I still ended up with a tiny bit of a wrinkle and a little bit of a fold line, but it looks decent enough. So take your time with this step and be methodical with your cuts. Now make sure when you're doing all of your edges that you pull your edges tight. The Tolex can stretch a little bit, so you can kind of stretch it to those corners a little bit within reason. I did the back edges 2 times. The first time I did it, I didn't really pull them tight enough, so I went back at it and I re-stretched those back corners and got them looking right again. But just make sure you take your time to stretch out those edges. All right, step 6, stapling the piping back on. So this thing staples to the inner edge of the front of the cab, and it's a pretty self-explanatory process, but I would kind of recommend after you complete a side, just double check that it is sitting the way you want, because you don't want your piping to look wavy or anything. You want it to look like a nice, clean, straight line of piping all around the edge of the cabinet. Now for step 7, we're installing the grill cloth on the baffle. I pretty much recommend stapling like one side, like the top side for example, and then pulling things tight. And you just gotta try to make sure that there's uniform tension across everything. You don't want it to be tight on one side or in one area and loose on the other, because then you will start to see visible rippling and things like that. So be aware of that. Step 8, we're reinstalling and test fitting the baffle. So once you get the grill cloth onto the baffle, it's good to just kind of test fit it in there, make sure that it's all looking good. And I thought the cab looks pretty sweet, just like this. I would totally rock an unbranded cab like this because it just looks super clean like that. But at the same time too, the whole purpose here is I want it to be a Marshall cab. So I'm definitely gonna install all the brand stuff. All right, step 9, we're installing the logo and the JCM 900 badge. So for installing the Marshall logo, use a flashlight to try to find the holes where they fit in. It's just like press fit. So once you find those holes, you can poke a hole into the grill cloth and basically tap the logo into those holes so it sits flat. Be careful with this process. You don't want to crack your Marshall logo or tear your Tolex or anything like that. And then for the JCM 900 badge, there's kind of 2 portions of it. There's the back part with 2 screws, so you just put those back into the holes, pretty simple. And then the JCM 900 badge is just this little metal plate that goes on top of that. I personally have not applied new glue to this. I just pressed it back on and it stuck with the previous glue. So realistically, it's probably best to put a little dab of glue on this just to make sure that it's not gonna fall off if it's in transit, but I'm tempting fate with this one. Step 10, we are reinstalling the casters. So this is pretty self-explanatory. I have these custom casters that I've done. I have a previous video about that. I'll link that video up top here so you can check that out if you like. And then step 11, we're installing all the plastic stuff. So the handles, the top plates, the corners, the jack plate, etc. With this step of the process, I just use a hammer and I hammer these things back in, taking my time to try to make sure that I'm mounting these corners on straight so they don't look wonky and crooked. However, I ran into a little bit of some issues with this one. So when I was installing the corners, some of the rivets wouldn't fully seat. And I think that that's just because I filled those holes with the dowels and the wood glue and it became really hard. So what I ended up doing for those problem areas is I ended up drilling a couple of pilot holes in each hole so the rivet has somewhere to go in there and we're not like creating too much pressure inside those holes. So that was kind of my workaround for installing those. And I found this process to be just really loud because you're just banging metal for a while. So, but yeah, once you get those corners on there, you pretty much got the cabinet finished. The last thing to do at this stage is just reinstall the speakers, the wiring, and put the back on. Also with putting the back on, I had to re-find all my screw holes on the back and that was a little bit of annoying. Think about that when you are doing your Tolex process, right? So if there's some way you can like mark those holes or not cover them up on the back side or something like that, you might have an easier time. I just ended up taking a little screw and just kind of poking around until I found each hole and then I would screw it in there. So yeah, that is all the steps that it took to get from a totally blank, unfinished cab that was just raw wood to being a fully finished Marshall cab with a custom color Tolex and a brand new grill cloth. And yeah, so here it is. Well, it has been a really cool, fun, challenging project to get this thing re-Tolex from start to finish. It's always been something I've been curious about to see what does it take to re-Tolex something, and it is a boatload of work, but at the same time, you end up with something really, really cool. So if this was your project, what color or what kind of Tolex would you do? What type of grill cloth? What would you do if it was your RE-TOLEX project? Definitely let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Consider leaving me a like and subscribing to my channel. Any little bit of those things helps support the channel, helps it kind of get off the ground, hopefully. And we'll see if this thing can get enough support to eventually become a self-sustaining little thing. But until then, thanks again and check out this next video right here in front of me. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.